Hello again and welcome back to the channel. This is Michael from TOEFLresources.com, and in today's video I am going to share with you one more sample TOEFL independent essay. Last week I made a video where I actually wrote the essay on the screen for you and talked about it, but that did take about 45 minutes and I think some people didn't like the length of the video. So this week, hopefully the video is going to be a little bit shorter, but just as useful to you. Now, let's get started by taking a look at the question. This is an agree-disagree style question. Now, the thing about this question is that I actually took it from the official guide to the TOEFL, but upgraded it. The reason I had to upgrade the question is that a lot of the sample questions in that textbook and in a lot of other textbooks are actually out of date. They're old style and they're in a style that isn't actually used on the real test these days. Now, what am I talking about there? Well, if you see any questions that ask you to describe something, you should know that they're out of date. So the original version of this question was something like, the internet has had a major effect on life in today's world. Describe the most prominent effect of the internet. And note that it was asking you to describe something. The real test won't ask you to describe something. So you might have seen the question asking you to describe the most important characteristics of a good teacher. That's also out of date. There's a question that asks you to describe a perfect coworker. That's also out of date. Now, I won't describe here the actual question styles because I want to keep the video concise, but if you check out my guide to the independent essay, you will see all of them. There's 3. This is in the agree-disagree style. Now, the agree-disagree style simply gives you a statement, usually just one sentence long, and asks if you agree or disagree with it. And you have to write your essay about that. The thesis of your essay will be whether or not you agree or disagree with that sentence. So, let's start talking about the actual essay we've got now. So as you can see, this independent essay begins with an introduction. I always teach my students to begin with a 3-sentence introduction. Those 3 sentences are first a hook, second a thesis statement, and third, a transition. Let's see what we've got here. The first sentence is the hook. Now, the hook is simply a broad introduction to the general topic of the essay. It's not your thesis. It's not the opposite of your thesis. And it's not a restatement of the question. It's merely a background sentence that introduces the general topic. In this case, the general topic is technology and its effects on the world. So my hook says, most people agree that modern technology affects society in many different ways. Easy, right? I'm just introducing the general theme. Now, a couple things to keep in mind in your hook. Try not to repeat words that are used in the question. You want to show off your vocabulary here. So instead of saying most people agree that the internet affects society, I just changed that to modern technology. I think that's more impressive in a vocabulary sense. Instead of saying that it affects the world, I said it affects society. Again, it means pretty much the same thing, but it's a different word. Next, is my thesis. Now, the thesis should begin with something like, in my opinion, or I believe. You want a cue, a marker that says to the human grader and the computer grader of your essay, here's my thesis. So make it really obvious. I love in my opinion, and my template on the website includes something quite similar to that. The thesis should just be one sentence long. In this case, I wrote, in my opinion, access to the internet is enormously beneficial to both individuals and communities as a whole. It's pretty concise. The only bit where I got fancy is when I changed today's world to both individuals and communities as a whole. That's simply a fancier way of saying today's world. But again, I didn't want to copy right from the prompt word for word. Lastly, I wrote my transition. I feel this way for two reasons, which I will explore in the following essay. All my samples have pretty much the same transition. You can use it too. You're not going to get penalized for using my sentence. How long should you spend writing the introduction? I usually recommend 3 or 4 minutes. The body's the most important thing. You know, I talked to a teacher yesterday and I asked him that question. And he was like, you know, Mike, I just asked them to write 2 minutes for the introduction. He gets them to speed right through. So my point is, don't spend too much time on your introduction. It's not as important as the body paragraph. Speaking of those, let's get to them. You should begin your first body paragraph with another marker, another signifier that you're actually starting the body paragraph. In this case, I used to begin with. You could use first of all or firstly, something like that. Simply make it very, very clear that you're beginning a body paragraph. I say that because most of your score is coming from a computer program. A human will always be able to tell when you're beginning a body paragraph, but the computer, kind of dumb, right? So you really want these clear signals. A clear signal that you're writing your body paragraph, just like you have a clear signal that, yeah, now I'm writing my thesis. The first sentence of a body paragraph is called the topic sentence. Now, the topic sentence should be a little summary of the argument you're making in that whole body paragraph. Some people kind of forget to do that, but you're really kind of laying all your cards out on the table, to use an idiom. You're making it very clear in that line what the whole argument is. So in this case, I wrote, to begin with, online investigative reporting helps to expose political corruption and keep politicians honest. So now you should know that the whole paragraph is going to be about online investigative reporting and corruption. And there's going to be nothing else in that paragraph. That's going to be it. Now, I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but what comes next? Well, you need 1 or 2 or 3 explanatory sentences. These just kind of elaborate on the argument you've just stated. Just give me more information. Make it more clear what that argument is. So just imagine someone reading your topic sentence and they're saying, what do you mean? Well, I'll tell you what I mean in the next few sentences. Now, some people write their essays and they actually don't include any explanatory sentences. They just jump right into the personal example. In my experience, that was okay in the past, but these days, the e-rater and the human raters are specifically looking for these sentences. I think you need at least one explanatory sentence before you jump into a personal example. I think that is maybe another change that has happened to the TOEFL in recent years. That the e-rater is specifically programmed to look for some explanations before you get into the personal exam. Now, any kind of stylistic techniques and tricks I used for these? Yeah, a couple. I used the discourse phrase "as a result." You're going to be rewarded for using phrases like "as a result," "therefore," "consequently," "moreover." Again, if you've seen my videos, this is something I always stress in both the writing and the speaking parts. It shouldn't be new to you, but if it is, I'll try to put a link in the video description that lists a few more of these phrases. As a result, I gotta say, is my absolute favorite such phrase. I kind of demand that students use it at least once in every essay they write. It's just easy, it's sophisticated. You're not gonna mess it up. I also used however. That's another easy one to use, but it is something that the e-rater is looking for. Okay, so after I've written my explanatory sentences, I jump right into an example from my life that illustrates the argument. And you don't have to be too sophisticated when you begin it. Here, I just began it with "for example." That was the transition. For example, followed by a comma. You can use "for instance." And when we look at the second body paragraph, you'll see I used something different there. But I just transitioned into this personal example by using the phrase "for example." And then I talked about an incident from my life where some online journalists revealed some political corruption. Any techniques here or things to keep in mind? Well, in this case, I think the example was 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences. That's pretty standard. 4 or 5. In this case, the explanatory sentences, they're a bit longer than I usually write. I generally ask that the example makes up 60% of the paragraph. I think in this case it's 50%. That's okay, but it's not the perfect ratio that I generally teach. Also, you'll notice at the end of this paragraph, I included a summing up sentence. This example demonstrates how the internet helps to strengthen democracy in the modern world. So I ended the body paragraph by repeating the topic sentence, but with new words. I paraphrased it. This is optional. Don't feel that you must always end every body paragraph by repeating the topic sentence, by repeating your argument. That's not mandatory. In my sample essays, I might do that 50% of the time. It's not obligatory. It's a good thing to do, especially if you're kind of running out of ideas, but you still want the essay to be about 400 words. You know, it's a fine thing to do. Keep that in mind. All right, next up is the second body paragraph. And again, I'm starting that with a clear signifier that I'm at the second body paragraph. I start with "secondly." I almost always ask my students to use "secondly" in this position. Some students want to begin with "moreover," and that's fine, but the advice I give them is that "moreover" is such a valuable discourse phrase and that you can use it almost in every example, so it shouldn't be wasted at the beginning of a body paragraph. So what I mean is, like, just use "secondly" here because that's the only place where "secondly" is really going to fit, and then use "moreover" somewhere else in the essay. I just think that's a good way to maximize your discourse phrases. Okay, so I'll read you the topic sentence. Secondly, people are more motivated than ever to become politically active because they can freely exchange ideas online. Again, I'm trying to avoid just directly repeating words from the prompt. Again, I didn't use internet, I said online. I could have said exchange ideas on the internet. But you know what? The internet is used in the prompt, it's used elsewhere in the essay. I want to vary my vocabulary as much as I can here. A couple other techniques. ly adverbs. It's a good way to kind of easily use more difficult vocabulary. Politically active. Freely exchange. ly adjectives, adverbs, I mean, are generally, easy for students to use, even if you're at an intermediate level. And they really vary your vocabulary. So I highly recommend them. Next up, I have the explanatory sentences. As you can see, this is a lot shorter than last time. It's just 2 sentences, but that's generally enough. Then I transitioned into the personal example. I used a full transitional sentence this time. My own experience demonstrates this concept. That's similar to what I include in my template, although it is a little bit different. The transition, I think, is also almost mandatory. You really want to make it clear. Now I've finished my explanatory sentences and I'm going to start the personal example. So you need to, again, include this signal, this signifier that you're moving on to the next part of the essay. Make things really easy for the human rater and for the e-rater. From what I've heard, the human raters only really look at your essay for a minute, maybe 90 seconds. So you want to make it easy for them to recognize that, yeah, your structure is fine. And that, yeah, you've got all the parts of the essay that you need. Okay, and then I moved on to the personal example. I won't read it all, but you can pause it if you want to check out the details. This one is about an ideal length. I think it's 65 or maybe even 70% of the body paragraph. That's a good length. Most of your paragraph is going to be that personal example. Any techniques I want to mention? Well, again, I used however as a discourse phrase. I kept my vocabulary varied. I'm trying to use compound sentences rather than just simple sentences. In this case, I did not end the body paragraph by repeating the topic sentence. And that's not mandatory, so I didn't do it this time. Finally, we end with a conclusion. Conclusions should be pretty easy to write. I would love it if you could finish it in like 90 seconds. It's just 2 sentences long. First, you begin by repeating your main point, by repeating your thesis. In this case, I wrote, in conclusion, I strongly believe that the internet has a positive effect on our lives. I think that should be effect. I'm paraphrasing the thesis. I'm not repeating it word for word, but I am expressing the same idea. Next up, I repeat the 2 main arguments. That is the argument from the first body paragraph and the argument from the second body paragraph. I start with this is because, and again, I'm paraphrasing those as much as I can. I'm trying to use new words. At this point, it's going to be kind of hard to come up with completely new words because you've been paraphrasing all along. But again, do your best. Try to avoid repeating yourself. Be bold. It doesn't matter if you kind of change the argument a little bit at the end, because you've paraphrased it so much. That's okay. Here I said that social networking sites encourage people to get involved in local politics. My argument in the topic sentence never mentioned local politics, so I've changed the meaning a little bit. That's totally okay. Lastly, I did a word count a moment ago. This essay is 411 words. That's just about ideal if you want to get a really high score. I generally recommend between 380 and 400 words for the independent task. If you're looking for a score between 25 and 30 points, you should probably write within that range. If you want to get an absolutely perfect score, 30 points, you're probably going to need to write maybe a little bit more than 400. If you're okay with a lower score, that is like 20 points, 21, 22, you could probably write, 340, 350 words. But if you write any less than that, you're going to have trouble getting a good score, even if your grammar is really strong. It's just because your range of vocabulary will be limited, your range of grammatical structures will be limited, and even the strength of your argument will be limited because, you'll just have like a few sentences to actually express it. So that's what I think about word counts. I guess I will leave it at that. If you guys have any questions about this video, leave a comment below. And if you have any essay prompts that you really want answered, let me know and maybe I'll turn one of them into a video in the weeks ahead. All right, guys, take it easy and I'll see you later.